Okay, thank you again for joining us this afternoon for the Artist Talk with Ducan Tonatiuh. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for the Artist Talk with Ducan Tonatiuh. Ducan Tonatiuh is an award-winning author and illustrator. He is both Mexican and American. He grew up in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico and graduated from Parsons School of Design and the Eugene Line College in New York City. His artwork is inspired by pre-Columbian art, particularly that of the Mixtec codices. His aim is to create images and stories that honor the past, but that are relevant to people, especially children nowadays. So here in the gallery, I've installed three Duncan's prints that I chose from three different books. The one back here is from Dear Primo, this book. And then the middle one is from Separate is Never Equal, this book. And then lastly on the cover here is an illustration from Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote, A Migrant's Tale. So I'm really happy to have these installed in the gallery, and they look amazing along with everyone else's work. So at this point, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce you to Ducan Tonatiuh. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Thank you for everyone that joined. And yes, so my name is Duncan, or in Spanish, I pronounce my name Duncan. So you can call me Duncan, you can call me Duncan. And I write and I illustrate books for young readers. I have made 14 books total. And out of those 14 books, most of them I wrote and illustrated. I did both. For some books, for three of them, a different author wrote and I did the illustrations, but I primarily write and illustrate. And all my books are very different from one another. It's not like a series where the same characters appear again. Some of the books that I've done are fiction. Some of them are nonfiction. And they're all very different. But one thing they have in common is that they all have to do with Mexican culture or Mexican-American culture in some way. And so what I want to do today is just tell you a little bit of my journey of why I started doing that, of how I became a children's book author and an illustrator, show you a little bit of my process. I also have a new book coming out in the fall, so I want to give you a sneak peek of that. And I definitely want to make sure we have time for some questions, if you have any questions. And so hopefully you'll find it interesting. So yeah, I was born in Mexico and grew up in Mexico. I was born in Mexico City. But then when I was about 8 years old, my family moved to a smaller city called San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. It's a very beautiful city. There's a large expat community here, a lot of American and Canadian retirees in San Miguel. And that's where I grew up. And when I moved to San Miguel, I didn't know a lot of the kids in my neighborhood. I didn't know a lot of the kids in my school. You know, my parents had sold the TV we had at the house. So I didn't have a TV. And what I started doing is that I would borrow a lot of books from my school library. And that's when I discovered reading for the fun of it. They had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure. I began, you know, I would borrow one and a few days later I would borrow another one. And because I like reading, I thought maybe I could be a writer someday. And that's kind of when the idea popped in my head, or when I first thought about it. And it's something that stayed with me. And later on I went to, especially in high school, went to a very arts-oriented high school, and I took a lot of writing classes, and later on in college also. But it all began when I was a kid in elementary school. And at that time, it's also when I became interested in in drawing. My cousins that lived in Mexico City came to visit me, and um, they brought a bunch of comic books. They brought a stack of comic books like X-Men and Spider-Man, and I had never seen comic books. So I got really into them. I began saving my allowance to buy my own comics. But then I also started trying to make my own. My cousins and I, we would often get together during summer break or winter break. We would all go to my grandma's house in Mexico City, and we would show each other our new comic book. But then we would also grab pieces of paper. We would grab newspaper, notebooks, old notebooks, and draw our own superheroes, our own characters. And that's when I really started drawing. And it's something that I never stopped doing. I continued drawing. I later on, you know, at different times had different interests. Like once I was finally able to have a television, I was really into anime, into manga, the Japanese cartoons that were on TV. And later on, I really like political cartoons that I saw in newspapers. And later on, when I went to this very art-oriented high school, I did a lot of painting and black and white photography. But again, it sort of began for me when I was in elementary school. That's when my interest in both drawing and writing began. And there are two things that I've, you know, since I was a kid, I've always enjoyed doing both. But then when I was about 15 years old is when I came to the US. My father, he's American. He came down to Mexico in the late 60s with his hippie buddies, and he was supposed to be in Mexico for a month or so. And 50 years later, he's still here. He never went back to live in the US. Eventually, he met my mom and had me, had my brother. My mom had me and my brother. But because my father's American, I'm both Mexican and American. And so when I was 15, I came to the US. I didn't like my high school in San Miguel. And there was a cousin of mine that had attended this high school in Massachusetts that was very arts oriented, and that he thought I would really enjoy because he knew that I was into art. And I went to this high school, and I really enjoyed it. And then I went to design school in New York City, to Parsons, which is part of the New School University. And I went there because I wanted to be in the city, but also because I could take classes at Parsons' sister school at Eugene Lang, where I could do a lot of writing. But so after I came to the US, after I spent more time in the US, I began to miss things that were around me growing up in Mexico, different things like the food, the music, different traditions. I began to miss those things, and I started becoming more interested in the art of Mexico and the culture of Mexico. I think that sometimes when you're surrounded by something, you don't really pay much attention to it because, you know, it's just what's around you. But sometimes when you're away from it, you see it kind of from a different light, a different perspective. And so for me, you know, something, let's say like a holiday, like the Day of the Dead is just something that I celebrate as a kid every year. And I never thought twice about it. But after I came to the US and people didn't celebrate it or didn't celebrate as much, I began to realize that it was a very unique holiday and very different and a very different way to celebrate. And so I became more interested in the art of Mexico and issues that affect people of Mexican origin. You know, there's such a large Mexican community and Mexican American community in the United States. And so I became very interested in issues of like immigration, like segregation that affect people of Mexican origin in the United States. And so especially when I was in college, I would often, if I was able to connect my different assignments that I had to my background, to my Mexican background. So for example, I remember I took a photography class at some point, and I decided to photograph this big march, this big protest, immigrant protest that was happening, where a lot of Mexican immigrants were participating. I tried to document that. Or I remember at a different semester, I was taking this writing class, fiction writing class, and I tried writing a story that was set in San Miguel, trying to remember what it was like when I was a kid. And so I would often do that. And my last year in college, I had to have a senior project, a final project. And it was pretty open, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. I knew I wanted to do something with writing. I knew I wanted to do something with drawing. I really enjoyed graphic novels, and I was very inspired by graphic novels like Mouse, about the Holocaust, or Persepolis, about the revolution in Iran. And so I thought that maybe I could do something like that, something that was graphic, that was writing, that was drawing, that talk about history or current events, politics. Um, and at the time, I was also taking a class called community organizing. And because of this class, I started volunteering at this worker center in New York, a worker center called NMAS, the National Mobilization Against Sweatshops. And at this worker center, I made a friend named Sergio, and Sergio is from Mexico, but he is Mixtec. And Mixtecs are an indigenous group, a group native to the states of Oaxaca, Guerrero, Puebla, and southern Mexico. And there's a lot of Mixtecs that have migrated to different parts of the US, and there's a large Mixtec community in New York and in the tri-state area. And one of the things that really kind of struck me soon after I met him is that he would speak his Mixtec dialect, his indigenous language, with his cousins or other of his coworkers. And so I thought that maybe that would be interesting to do a project about that. And he was at this worker center because he was helping other workers there because he had successfully organized. He had managed to organize these other Mixtec guys that worked at his restaurant, and they were able to recuperate all these wages that they were owed and have better working conditions at their place, even though they were undocumented. And so I thought that his story was very interesting and inspiring. And I decided that I wanted to do my senior project on that. And so one of the first things that I did once I decided that that was going to be my project was go to my university's library and look up Mixtec artwork. And in books, I found these kinds of images. There's modern day Mixtecs, but the Mixtecs were also a civilization similar to the Aztecs, to the Maya, that made books. The Mixtecs made these long books that we nowadays call codices, that were painted on the hides of deers. And they had a very stylized way of drawing. You know, they always draw people in profile. They have a very unique way of drawing hands and ears and feet. And so I was really taken by these drawings when I saw them. And I had seen this kind of artwork, you know, as a kid growing up in Mexico. Like I remember one of my textbooks at my elementary school had a picture of the Aztec calendar. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's this round stone with a sun in the middle sticking its tongue out like this. And it has a lot of these glyphs that look similar in a similar style. Or in San Miguel, there's a artisans market, and they sell different crafts, and sometimes they have crafts that are inspired by these kinds of drawings, like codex-like drawings. But, you know, when I was a kid, you know, like I mentioned before, what I liked were comic books. Later on, it was anime and manga. Those were the things that really inspired me to draw. But after I'd lived in the US for several years, for many years, and I saw this kind of artwork again, I was really taken by it. And I decided that I wanted to do a modern day codex of my friend's story. And so this is actually my senior project. I called it Journey of a Mixteco, and the book folds out like this, like an accordion. And here's Sergio telling his story in the subway. And then it's kind of like a long speech bubble. And, you know, it begins with how he grew up in Guerrero. But then he had to start working from a very young age because his father passed away. And then of coming to the US without documents, of the different jobs that he had, that it's very common for Mixtec guys, for Mexican guys to have, like working in kitchens and delis, delivering food. And so, you know, if you can notice, if you can see, the drawings are very much inspired by these kinds of drawings. You know, they're always in profile. The way I draw hands, ears, feet is inspired by those drawings. One thing that I decided to do a little differently, though, is that I use a lot of textures. And so I don't know if you can notice, but there's, the pants look like real jeans, or, or for example, here in this spread, the background is like a newspaper background. And so what I do to do that, to create artwork that way, is that I draw on a piece of paper with a pencil, and then, do little doodles, little sketches, and then I'll do my drawing. And once I like it, I go over with a pen. Sometimes I'll do the arms or hands kind of on a different layer that then I'll add on. But so I'll do a drawing like this, and then I'll scan my drawing. And then I collage different textures into my drawings. So let me share with you my screen so I can show you how I do that. Okay. So here, for example, is this drawing that I did on a piece of paper. And I scanned the drawing, but I have all these sorts of textures that I've scanned. I have this folder here full of all sorts of things that I've scanned. And so, for example, this is a texture that I use a lot. It's from this brown paper bag, and it's just a bag that they gave me at the supermarket to put my groceries in. And I can, in this program in Photoshop, I can select it, I can copy it, and then I go back to my drawing, and then I choose different areas here, the face, the hand, and then I can paste into it. And then that becomes the skin. Or, for example, I can do the jeans. And so here, for example, I have a texture of a pair of jeans, a pair of pants that I put on the, let me see, I like using this one. A pair of jeans that I put on the scanner, and now I can see their texture, and I can select it and copy it. And I go back here and paste into it. And those become the jeans. And so a lot of things I scan, but some things I photograph, like for example, hair, I could try and put my head in the scanner and scan my hair that way, but that probably wouldn't work out very well. But so instead of doing that, I can take a picture of someone's hair, or I can find an image on the internet. And so, for example, I like using this image I found on the internet of this Elvis wig. And I can select it, and I go back here, and I paste into it. Oh, it's a little small, so I got to stretch it out, rotate it around a little, but that becomes the hair. And then let me stop sharing my screen. And so then that's how I started creating my illustrations. That became my way of working. And if you look at my books, you'll notice that for all the different areas, the pants, the t-shirts, the different backgrounds, I create them using that technique. And so, I was working on my senior project, and it was the middle of the semester, and we had to put our work up on the wall, what we had been doing. And different teachers, different professors came to critique our work. They weren't my teachers, they were guest teachers that were there. And they walked around and, looked at everyone's work and gave us feedback, gave us comments. And a professor, really liked a woman named Julia Gorton, thought that what I was doing was interesting. She thought that it, that it was unique, that it was interesting. And she had illustrated some children's books. And she told me, have you ever thought about illustrating books for young readers? It's something that I've done, and I'm good friends with this editor. Would you mind if I showed him your work? And I said, please, show him this. You can, take this printout, take that printout. And so she showed it to this editor at a company called Abrams. And the editor, a man named Howard, thought that what I, thought my drawings were interesting. And I went, and one day after school, I went and met with him at his office, which happened to be very close to where I went to school. It was like 6 blocks away from where I went to school. And I met with him, and he said, this book that you're making, it's kind of weird the way it folds. And this is more a story for older readers, but I think your illustrations are very interesting, very unique. And if we receive a manuscript that a different author wrote that we think would pair well with your illustrations, we'll give you a call, I'd like to work with you. And I said, that would be amazing, but I like writing too. I'm actually taking all these writing classes also. Maybe I could write the book. And he said, yeah, he said, that could work. And then he told me some very basic things about picture books. He said, the kind of books that I focus on primarily are picture books. They're usually 32 or sometimes they're 40 pages long or a multiple of 8, because that's a very efficient way to fold the book when it gets bound, so no paper is wasted. And he said, I suggest you leave a page there for the title page, leave a copyright page. Leave a copyright page, a title page. And he said, my suggestion to you would be to make your protagonist, your main character, maybe a young person or an animal, someone that young readers can identify with. And if you write something, send it to me. And so sometime later, while I was still finishing my project, I had an idea for a book about 2 cousins, one that lived in a rural community in Mexico, and one that lived in an urban center in the United States. And they sent letters back and forth to each other about their everyday life, their everyday experiences. And so I wrote in my notebook, I typed on my computer. I had never written a picture book manuscript. So I thought, well, kids like Dr. Seuss, so I should make a rhyme like Dr. Seuss. And I wrote it and I sent it to this editor. And, some days later he responded, he said, I got the manuscript you sent me. And I think this idea about the 2 cousins in different countries is very interesting. I think it's good. It can make a good book. And I think you would do a good job illustrating it, but no rhyming, please. Your rhymes are not very good. And I had to revise the story. And it's something that I have to do with all my books. They never come out perfect. The first time I always have to revisit them a lot. But I revised the story, and eventually, right after I graduated from college, I got my contract to do my first book, which was this one, Dear Primo, a letter to my cousin. And, a lot of things in the book are inspired by things that I did as a kid, like playing football, playing with trompos and canicas, different traditions, different holidays that I celebrated. But then the book is also inspired by by the kids, especially the kids in New York that I saw. I try, the way they dressed, the games they played. And when I lived in New York for a while, I lived in a neighborhood called Sunset Park. And in Sunset Park, there's a large Mexican community. And when I moved to Sunset Park, the thing that struck me were the kids, because they looked just like the kids that I had grown up with in San Miguel. But it was like when I moved to Sunset Park, it was the middle of winter. So they were all wearing big jackets. They were all speaking English. There was snow on the ground. From Sunset Park, you can see the Manhattan skyline. It has a really nice view of the Manhattan skyline. And whereas where I grew up in San Miguel, the houses are very short but colorful. The streets are cobblestones. It's pretty warm most of the year. So kids are usually wearing t-shirts. Everyone speaks Spanish. So to me, it was sort of like the same child, but in a different environment, the same kid, but in a different environment. And that was a big inspiration for doing this book. And when I did this book, a lot of it is about the differences. One likes to play football and the other one likes to play basketball, or one likes to eat quesadillas and the other one likes to eat pizza. But then I realized it was also about the similarities, because they both like sports. They both like cheesy food. They both like, spending time with their friends, spending time with their families, celebrating different traditions, different holidays. And I feel that that's one thing that I've learned by growing up in both countries and having family in both countries, is that even though some things are very different, there are more similarities than differences. And I hope that that's kind of the message that this book conveys. And so I did Dear Primo, and that really opened this world of making children's books for me. By the time I was a teenager, I was very convinced that I wanted to be an artist, that I wanted to do art for a living. But I always thought that I was going to do something for adults. Maybe like write for a newspaper or be a painter, and my paintings would hang in galleries. Maybe write a novel. And I didn't really consider doing children's books till this professor that reviewed our work at my last semester in college. That's when I first even thought about it. But now I'm super happy that opportunity happened. because it's not, it's, you know, I get to write and illustrate, which are these two things that I've loved doing since I was a kid. I get to share things that I care about, learn about things that I want to learn more about. And there's some things about picture books, about children's books that I really like. You know, I don't think like books for young readers need to have a happy ending, but I do think they need to be hopeful in some way, need to have something positive, have a positive message. And that's one thing that I enjoy about making books for young readers. I also think they need to, you know, they need to capture readers' attentions pretty quickly. You know, if you read a book, you know, a novel as an adult, maybe you'll wait 20, 30 pages and then you'll be, I'm not sure about this book. But a kid, you know, you have to hook them quickly to, so they'll keep reading. And so I like that challenge of making books for kids. You know, when I started making books, you know, like this one that I did as my senior project, which it took a long time to publish, but I was able to publish it under the title Undocumented some years ago. You know, when I started doing these projects, a lot of it came from missing things about Mexico. You know, when I moved to the US and kind of wanting to just be proud of my culture and learn more about it. But then, you know, as I made more books, I began to learn also about the need for multicultural literature and sort of learn a little bit more about the publishing industry in the US. And, you know, in the US, there's thousands of books that get published every year for young readers. But of the books that get published, a small percentage of them, a small amount of them are about, you know, Latino children, Mexican-American children, African-American children, Asian-American children. Even though the United States is such a diverse country, the books that are available don't really reflect that diversity. And I think it's really important to have books where children can see themselves. And I think it's important because like, I think when you see yourself in a book, it lets you know that your voice is important, your stories are important. And for me, one very kind of concrete example of it happened when I made a book called Pancho Rabbit. It's this book, Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote. And it was the third book I made, that I've made. And the book is a little bit like the Little Red Riding Hood. It's a fable with animals that talk. But it's also an allegory. And in the book, Pancho is searching for his father, and this coyote helps him. And there's all these dangers that he goes through. But the dangers that he goes through are dangers that often migrants go through to reach the US, like riding on trains, crossing the river, walking in the desert. So the book is also an allegory of the journey that migrants sometimes go through. And so I was at this book festival in Texas that they invited me to come, and, you know, they had different authors that would read, and 30 minutes later, a different author would come at this tent that they had set up. And an author would read, and then 30 minutes later, a different author would come, and 30 minutes later, an author would come throughout the day. But every time an author would come, they would have a group of students introduce the author. And so this group of students from Texas introduced me. And then they said, and now we want to share a short video that we made after reading Mr. Tonatiuh's book. And so I want to share with you this video really quickly. One second here. Here it is.
I'm 10 years old. I'm in first grade. I live in the United States. I always have.
I came here when I was a baby.
Yo vine hace 2 años. My parents grew up in the United States, but my family speaks Spanish.
My grandpa said they grew up very poor. My dad said there was no work in Mexico.
In Honduras.
And Guatemala.
My mom said we could go to school in the United States and have the education she didn't get to have.
My family decided that we will go.
My best friend told me how he swam across the river.
My mom told me how cold the water was and how she held me close because I was just a baby.
My dad said he crashed his desert. He said he has no food. No water.
no shoes.
No money. That's how my tio died.
My mom tried to come here 3 times before she got across. I waited for her for a year.
I came across it at night. We ran. We were quiet.
We had nothing, just a phone number of my cousin who would come pick us up.
Now we're here. Some of us were born here.
Some of us were carried here as babies.
Some of us just came here. Apenas llegué. But we all want the same thing. To learn.
To grow.
To find our way.
I want to be a doctor.
I want to be a vet. I want to be a teacher. I want to be an artist. I want to be an author.
Will you let me?
And so that's a video. I didn't make the video. It's, it's these 4th grade students. And I was very moved when they shared it with me. But for me, it really sort of convinced me of this idea, or not convinced, but, reaffirmed this idea of the importance of seeing oneself in books, because I thought that, by reading my book, it kind of helped them know that their stories are important, their voices are important. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to have multicultural literature, diverse literature, where children can see themselves. And I mean, I think the other reason, and this is, this theory of books as mirrors and also as windows, is because I think books can be an opportunity to learn about someone that's different than yourselves also. And I think when you learn about someone that's, speaks a different language, or has, other religious beliefs, or has different skin color, maybe if you meet them through books, you're less likely to have prejudice towards people in real life if you've met them through books. So I think that's another kind of importance and the power of multicultural literature. But are there any thoughts or questions so far?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, and if you have any thoughts at this point.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, hello. My name is Julia. I just wanted to say I'm an art student, and I don't know like a lot about like Photoshop and stuff, but seeing the way that you like layer textures literally just from stock images is one of the coolest things I've seen. I've never seen anybody do that. So the fact that you can integrate that into your art and into your books is super awesome. And I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you. That's very kind. And, I mean, that was one of the great things of being in art school. Like, no one taught me that in school. I think I was at I was at the computer lab working on a different assignment, and I saw someone else just next to me do something kind of like that, and I was like, what did you just do? How did you do that? It was like, oh, you just copy and paste. And I was like, oh, cool. And then I started messing around with it and playing around with it and kind of making it my own in my own way. And so I think that's some of the, I feel very lucky that I make books and for a living now, and I've been able to do it for a while, but I miss being a student, and I miss kind of those first years when I was making books, because even though I wasn't, like, after I made my first book, it was challenging to be able to sell my second book, to convince a publisher to do my second book. But so during that time, I did a lot of kind of like my own personal projects, and I had a blog that I was very active on, doing different illustrations about current events and things like that. And so while now, like that I've made several books, I have a lot more stability, and I'm able to do it for a living full time. But I do miss being a student. I do miss those first years of being a professional, when it was an opportunity to experiment a lot and try a lot of different things out, and kind of try and find my voice. And just art school was a great opportunity to do that and learn from others, learn from other classmates and teachers and whatnot.
I guess hi, I'm Deb Riccardi. I teach here, but I have a couple questions. I'm a missionary, and I've been going to Colate in Guatemala for, since 2013. And I think one of the most heartbreaking things, the realization of they didn't have any books. They didn't have any paper. Paper and crowns were gold, and we'd spend our teams, because now there's such a thing about weight and what you can bring in the country, we would smuggle crowns and paper in. So to have all these little kids who never had a crown, or, I mean, that kind of reality. But I guess my question, because we're going back, I just got word, we haven't had any word that till it was 2 days ago. Thank God for that. But my question for you as an author, and I like what you said about being mirrors and windows and multicultural. I think, are your books, number one, I saw some, are they bilingual? Are they Spanish and English? Are they both? Are they published in English, but all of your books that you've written? And also, are they in ebook form? The one thing, I know this sounds crazy, the one thing that we did get money for, we've been working in Ko'olate on one village since 2013. So we basically rebuilt a village. We kind of adopted them, and then we just keep going back. But we did get computers there. The issues that we have, of course, is getting Wi-Fi there. But if, getting books in is hard. You wouldn't think anything that's heavy. So if your books were in ebooks, so something we could give to our leaders and say, can you share these with the kids? That would be something, are your books in ebooks, or is that, so that's something you could access, or?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And yes, so all my books have been published in English. It's, usually they have a little bit of Spanish in them, but they're primarily in English. But now several of them are available in Spanish. There's a version of Dear Primo that's called Dear Primo, una carta para ti. There's a version of this other book that I did, Separate is Never Equal, Separados no somos iguales. There's one of The Prince and the Warrior, La Princesa y el Guerrero, and there's more coming out. It's sort of been taking a little bit of time to kind of convince my publisher or other people to publish them in Spanish also, but there's more will be available soon. And right now I'm currently working on a board book. It's a book for babies, for very young kids, but that will be bilingual. And so they're all in English, and there's a few in Spanish, and more that will be available soon. And yeah, I believe all the books are available in as ebooks in PDF format. I've also had let me grab one really quick. There's also these ones that they've made. This company Dreamscape have done it for most of my books. And, this one, it's a DVD, but it can also be, I think, accessed on the web. But it's like, it has these, it's the book, and it's kind of animated a little bit. Not like not like an animated movie, but, it'll have a little bit of animation, and it'll have the words highlighted and whatnot. So there's some of these, I guess it's more like a audiobook, a video audiobook. And then there's also the book in electronic format available for I think pretty much all of my books.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the great work you do out in Guatemala.
Oh, I think they've taught me more than I've taught them.
Nice.
There's another question about if they're available in paperback. I think only a couple. I think there's an Scholastic version of Dear Primo in Spanish in paperback, and there's some that I'm not the author, just the illustrator, that are available in paperback. There's a company called, and I'll double check to make sure I don't have this wrong, First Book, and I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but if you are educators, they're a great resource to get books at discount prices, and they have a lot of my my books there, because I know that a hardcover is a lot more expensive than
a paperback, but you can get books at a very good price on her first book is this kind of, I believe it's a nonprofit and for teachers to be able to kind of build their libraries.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so thank you for talking about our favorite book. I'm a librarian at Calexico Unified, and during the pandemic we read, and I'm still reading like every day to students through Zoom. So this is one of their favorites. At some point we had like 300 kids listening to this story, and the question they had was, would you have a sequel for this book? They really want to know if they end up meeting.
Thank you for the question, and I'm glad they enjoyed it. It's definitely, I often get asked like, what's your favorite book that you've written? And it's very hard to choose one because all my books are very dear to me. I've put a lot of effort into them, but Dia Prima is definitely my favorite book to read out loud. It's the one that I enjoy reading to students the most, to readers the most. Yeah, so right now there isn't a sequel. I've thought about it, and hopefully maybe in the future I'll make it happen. Like I think at some point soon after the book came out, I had an idea for a sequel and I wrote it. And because I was so sort of lucky and everything worked so smoothly with getting this book published, I thought that, oh, everything I write will become a book. And I wrote something else and I showed it to the editor and he was like, I don't know about this. Maybe you need to work on this more. We don't know if there's the right project for us. So I get turned down a lot for different ideas. But oftentimes what I'll do is that something that I wrote, I will go back to it some years later and revisit and be like, oh, maybe if I just focus on this part of the story, or, I'll try and see if there's a different way to work it out. So right now there's nothing sort of like scheduled. I do have a couple ideas of how to do a part 2 for Dia Prima. And so hopefully in the future, the cousins will actually get to meet, but not quite yet. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. By the way, I thought your presentation was absolutely marvelous. I love the smooth progression, how you shared your background and how so much of you became part of your style. I teach children's book illustrating at UCSD, and that's the biggest issue all my students have is, how do I have to have a style? Do I have one? And I think I think it's really about confidence. A lot of it is about your story. And I've also noticed lately, a lot of the kids' books out there, the style, everybody learns Photoshop and what's the thing on the tablet, the drawing on the tablet, and everyone's work is starting to look alike. And yours is so distinctive. I love how you rooted it in the style of your ethnicity, but you meshed it in with you. So I commend you for that uniqueness, and for also the fact that the stories, even if it didn't have words, your pictures tell a story even without the words. I mean, even if the kids get it wrong, it's great that the kids can see a progression, that it moves cinematically. So I want to commend you, and I think your books are wonderful.
Thank you. That's very kind. I mean, I definitely think that a big part of me of both writing and illustrating is just communicating, kind of being able to get what I'm trying to say, that hopefully other people will understand what I'm saying. And so that's a big interest of mine as an illustrator, just being able to communicate that, that even if they don't know the words, they can still kind of get, figure out what the book is about or what it's trying to say. And yeah, I mean, it's like the challenge for me now that I've been doing it for a number of years is like how to make my books. I also don't want to get repetitive, so to speak, and so my challenge these days is hopefully trying to find interesting ways of using my style, but maybe changing it a little for different projects, depending on the project, in a way that yeah, that is interesting. That's something that I'm thinking about these days. But yeah, I feel lucky that I came up with this way of working. And when kids see it, you know, they'll oftentimes ask, like, why do they look like that? Why do their ears look like that? Why do their mouths look like that? But, you know, hopefully it can be an opportunity. I think sometimes when they kind of learn a little bit about why they do look like that, and maybe it can be an opportunity to learn about different kinds of art, and that there's not just one way of making art. You know, there's different styles, there's different traditions of art making, and so hopefully it'll be an opportunity to learn a little bit about that and explore different styles.
By the way, I thought that idea about asking if there's going to be a sequel to that was great, because immediately I noticed there's lately a trend toward books with parents, kids and their grandparents. And it opens this opportunity to hear about the grandparents' story, but then the grandparent also gets to learn something about the child too. So immediately I thought, oh, those are great. Not to mention kids don't write letters anymore. And it would be wonderful to motivate them, even if it's a pen pal or you know, or a kid that just wants to make a friend with somebody, not to mention, yeah, relatives, that newly discovered relatives. Anyway, I just think that's a wonderful track and an opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, definitely something to think about.
Thank you.
Well, something I'd like to share before we run out of time is my new book that is coming out. It's called A Land of Books, Dreams of Young Mexica Word Painters. And I'm very excited for it. I actually just got it. This is my, what's it called, like my proof copy. I got it earlier today in the mail. So I'm very excited about it. And, you know, my artwork is so inspired by these kinds of drawings, by Mesoamerican art, pre-Columbian art, that this book is actually about the Tlacuiloque, the people that painted books, that painted codices. You know, one thing that I feel very lucky about being an author and illustrator is that things that I care about, that I want to learn more about, I learn more about, and hopefully I'm able to turn it into a picture book. So I wanted to learn more about this, the people that made this kind of artwork and why they made it, how they made it. And so that's what this book is about. I'll share my screen with you so you can see it a little better. Where is it? There we go. So yeah, so in the story, it's this this girl who tells her brother that their world is an Amoxtlalpan, which in the Nahuatl language means a land of books, because before the Spanish and other Europeans came to this part of the world, there were people like the Aztecs or Mexica. We call them Aztecs nowadays, but they call themselves Mexica, the Maya, the Mixtecs that made books. There was this rich bookmaking tradition. And she tells her brother that her parents are Tlacuiloque, painters of words, and that the books that they made are these long strips that they can be folded down, and that's how, and that their parents make covers for these books that they decorate with the hides of jaguars or with precious feathers. And the Mexica made book with paper, with amatl, and in order to make the paper, they used the bark of a tree called the amacahuitl tree that they boiled with limestone and made a pulp, and then they patted the pulp down into thin sheets of amatl, of paper, so they could paint on. And they obtained colors from flowers, from rocks, from different minerals. They even obtained colors from insects. They would collect the cochineal insects that live on the nopal cactus, and then they would dry them and crush them and mix it with clay and water to make red paint. And Tlacuiloque not only painted books, but they were also in charge of decorating the temples with murals. They painted murals and they chiseled stones to create sculptures. And they were very well regarded in Mexica society, and they attended a special school called the Calmecac, where they took classes with noblemen, with warriors, because Tlacuiloque needed to know a lot about different subjects like astronomy, religion, warfare, so that they could paint about all those things in books. Mesoamerican books, one thing that is very different in their books than our books nowadays is that they didn't use any letters. It's all drawings, but the drawings could be read. The drawings are pictograms, a little bit like emojis. And so the different drawings could represent, like these symbols here represent different years, or different drawings of the pyramids represent locations. And, you know, the position of the hands could be read. The color that a person was wearing let you know if it was a governor, if it was an emperor. So people could, even though these books didn't have any letters in them, they still could be read. But not everyone knew how to read these books. Only Tlatoanis, the governors, the emperors, and the priests knew how to read these books. The Masehualtin, the people that worked the land, that were fishermen, that collected feathers, they didn't have access to these books, or didn't know how to read them. But sometimes there would be festivals, and at these festivals, there would be book readings. So the daughter tells her brother that tomorrow there's going to be a book festival, a festival where a book their parents painted will be read, and that tonight when they go to sleep, they should dream of books, that they should dream of books that are about the creation of the universe and the different gods, or books that are about their history and their legends, like the legend of how the god Blue Hummingbird spoke to their ancestors and told them to look for a sign, which was an eagle on top of a prickly nopal, and that there they should settle and build their mighty city, the city of Tenochtitlan. Or books are about the different Tlatoanis and the different people they married, the different deals they made, and the different people they conquered, and the tributes that different conquered people have to send them, like shields and grain and feathers and honey. Or to dream of books that are calendar books, that are almanacs, because the Mexica and other Mesoamerican people painted these books. You know, their weeks lasted 13 days instead of 7 like ours, and the days that they had for the week were names like crocodile, wind, house, lizard. And they believed that a different god was ruled over each different week. And so there were wise elders who would interpret these books to determine which days were auspicious for planting the corn or for holding a wedding, for different important events. And she tells them to dream of books or about the plants and the illnesses they cure, or about the stars and their movement. But then she tells her brother to wake up because it's time to go to the festival, the flower festival. And when they arrive to the flower festival, there's a reader that reads the books that are painted, reads the words that are painted on the book. And there's musicians that play music as he sings the words. Actually, he would sing the words. And there's dancers that dance as the words are sung, and incense, copal, incense that burns as the words are being read. And then she tells her brother that she hopes that their land will always be a Namochtlalpan, a land of books. And then at the end, I just have some more images of codices of Amoshtin, the Mexica code books Amoshtin. And here you can see a page from an Amoshtin. And then here's the same page with the book spread out. And in the author's note, I talk a little bit about how sadly most of these books were destroyed. There's only 15 of these books, Mesoamerican books, that survive because most of them were destroyed during the conquest, and after different priests that came to the Americas, they thought that these books were the work of, they didn't agree with their beliefs, and so a lot of them were burnt and destroyed, and only a few of them survive. And most of them are in museums in Europe. But nowadays, because of the internet, it's actually, one great thing is that there's a lot of, I was like at the end of the book, I have a lot of links to, or I mention a lot of websites where you can find reproductions of the codices. A lot of them have been scanned or photographed. And so because these books, they're all like in these special vaults because they're so delicate and so old. So it's only very few people are able to actually see the original ones anyway. That's the latest, and that'll be out in November.
Thank you for sharing that and being so generous with giving us a sneak peek. That's great. And I really like what you were saying about meeting other cultures through books. If kids can do that, and we encourage children to do that, I think that would be so helpful. I mean, not to be like a cure or a panacea for any kind of discrimination, but I think it would really help. And I think you're a champion of that process. And thank you
Thank you.
so much. Does anyone else have any final questions for Duncan? Thank you all for being here and asking such great questions and doing good work where you all live. It's been a pleasure. So let's just give a round of applause for Duncan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And happy Father's Day. And
Thank you. Yeah, I was celebrating it at my kids' school earlier today. And thank you for all your kind comments there in the chat. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and that was interesting for you.
absolutely. All right.